Sunday morning, calm and beautiful. We managed to survive Storm Brian yesterday and Storm Brian last night, which is more to the point because Storm Brian last night was raging, absolutely raging. So again, as I've done from the very beginning of the Bealtaine project, the morning after the storm, I've come out with my coffee, still in my slippers, as you can see. Oh, it's pointing down because I've got a big scarf that's obscuring it all. Everything's still here. Everything's still here, including the dodgy tile that's sitting on the top of the roof. It's crazy. Crazy, crazy. So I'm going to have a little walk down to the pond to see if it's still holding well and not leaking. Just enjoying my coffee here, look at this. It's a kind of a can't quite make its mind up sky. There's blue up there, then over here, very dark clouds. But we'll see. We'll see what the day brings. I'm just thankful and grateful to be walking here on the land and seeing the beautiful trees still standing. A little bereft of leaves now. This maple tree was really catching a lot of wind yesterday. So you can see through the branches now, a lot of the leaves have gone. Birds are singing. And the beautiful cherry tree now has lost most of her leaves. Now, I was emailed yesterday. I got quite a few. Well, I get quite a few emails every day, but this particular one, it was very short, and it just asked me what I felt about saving saving bees. And if I seen a bee trapped anywhere in a web, particularly, would I save it? Well, of course I would. I thought it was a strange question to ask me, but then I thought, well, actually it's a very pertinent question, because it's a question that brings in the question itself, how much we interfere with life. Well, I'll tell you a little story. Not long after my first child was born, my husband and I were lucky enough to have a house with a tiny little garden. Anyway, I decided I was going to get a hen. And in fact, even in those days, there was a lot of talk about battery hens, and there were rescue hens and stuff like that. Anyway, through all kinds of circuitous ways and means, I got myself a little hen. Shall we say, she was rescued from not a very nice life, anyway. Guess what I called her? Imagination not being at the fore. Henrietta. Jack, come on. So, anyway, years passed. Henrietta was a beautiful hen. Had her for years. Jack, come on. And then at one point, you know, because this is living in London, of course, you know, you move around a lot in London. At one point anyway, years later, we moved into a house with a much, much smaller garden. It was a kind of a townhouse, you know. And so my parents then at that point had moved to London because of all the troubles in Northern Ireland. And they had a house with a fairly big garden. And so I said to Mum and Dad, I said, you know, could you take Henrietta because our garden's going to be too small for her. So after a lot of hemming and hawing, you know, because my father didn't want the responsibility of pets, he says, oh, your mother and I have had 11 children, you know, oh, I don't think we've had enough responsibility, etc., etc., you know. But as all good dads do, he caved in the end. Dads are great at caving in, aren't they? So, anyway, they took Henrietta. So, no one knew how long a hen lived, but Henrietta, although her egg production slowed down, she was a happy girl, and she kept laying. And I'm trying to think how many years had elapsed. I think it was about 5 or 6 years. It could have been longer. Henrietta was obviously getting towards the end of her natural lifespan. And this is why I prefaced this little talk by saying that, you know, my father influenced me a lot because of his great humanity. Henrietta became very ill. So my father called the vet. The vet actually came out. I don't think he'd ever been out to a chicken before, but just basically said, well, look, Mr. O'Neill, you know, how long have you had this hen? Well, the hens don't normally live this long, but you know, she's having a bit of trouble breathing. You know, and it was just old age, you see. My father almost ran the vet from the house, because my father was the kind of man who would get incredibly indignant if he felt he knew more than you and you were trying to tell him what to do. And his attitude was, being a Northern Ireland man, what's the point in calling the vet if he can't fix the creature? So the vet was duly shown the door, and my father, bless him, Goddess bless him, he stayed up the rest of the night, the whole night, because the vet had been there about 8 o'clock or something, and nursing this hen and feeding her through a little funnel that he'd made tiny drops of Irish whiskey, because he always put his faith in Irish whiskey. He said, well, it's the Ishkababa, it's the water of life. It's made with Irish water, and you know, this'll help her. Well, so my father actually interfered, if you like, because this is what the story is about. He interfered with the process of life. So instead of simply being a bystander and watching, he was positively engaged in fighting for this little creature's life. So how did it end up? Well, Henrietta seemed to go into a coma for a couple of days, which on reflection was a drunken stupor. And she came round. And she lived, I think, for about another 3 or 4 months. She certainly didn't die that night anyway. Was she an alcoholic after that? Probably. She probably had terrible withdrawal symptoms. But she lived. She lived. And you see, that's how my father was. He would fight to the last to save life. And it didn't matter what that life was. He would fight to the last to save it. So, over the course of 13 years here, especially here, I have intervened on countless occasions to save and protect life. Because that's my role. That's my role as a human being in this incredible circle. It's my role because I can. You see, I can. And if you can do something, then you do it. Of course it doesn't stop, creatures and animals doing what comes naturally to them. Of course it doesn't. But it gives us a place in it all, doesn't it? And ultimately, you see, that's our responsibility. We have a responsibility to care for and protect Mother Earth and all her creatures. And when you think of it, that's what we do best. That's what my father did best. And when I'm thinking back about him, and I do get quite emotional. My father was a great humanist. He was a great fighter, and I think in short, let me just put my coffee down here. I think in short, because I can describe him to you in this quite simple way. My father was a small man in stature. He had a shock of thick red hair. And when you look at the old portraits of the Earls of Tyrone, the O'Neills, there was a marked resemblance between his features and those of what were our ancestors. So he had an incredible spirit. And to sum him up, he was the kind of man, albeit small in stature, that if you knocked him down 99 times, he would rise up 100. You could not defeat him. He was not someone to be defeated because his spirit and his will was so powerful and so strong. And I'll also say, as this is Sunday morning, and it's nice to reflect on the people that we love. My father was 17 years old when he married. My mother was 18. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? 17 years old. And because he was a strict Catholic and my mother converted to be a Catholic, they followed the rules of the Catholic Church implicitly and then proceeded to have 11 children. So my father never even got a chance to grow up, if you like, you know, in his own way, because he was a parent from very early on. And he never let us down. He was an incredible provider during the hardest and bleakest of times in Northern Ireland. Because Northern Ireland during the 50s and 60s and early 70s was a dismal place. It was dismal. There was very little there, except an enormous amount of poverty. So, you know, my father had a huge influence on me. And it's very interesting, actually, because I was thinking about this last night. And of course you all know that I was married for 21 years and I'm divorced, I suppose about the same length of time. But, and I've said this, you know, that there is a beautiful common humanity that I share with my ex-husband that allows us to be friends with a mutual respect for each other, because my ex-husband is very much the same as my father in that respect. He will fight tooth and nail to try to save the life of any creature and gets very distressed if he fails. I mean, to the extent, which is ridiculous really, to the extent where I can remember driving with him, you know, him being the driver and myself and the children in the car, and him swerving to avoid like a frog on the road, thus endangering our lives. Well, as a woman, you see, and a pragmatist, I wouldn't go that far. I would do my best, but I wouldn't go that far because the children would come first. But that's the kind of commitment he has to protecting and preserving life. So I suppose that's my answer, and that's how I am. Like I say, I'll be a pragmatist too, because human life, you know, like swerving about the road in a car with children in it is not something I would do. And perhaps that's the kind of extreme picture that I've painted there, but nonetheless a true picture. It's lovely actually thinking about my father. Because I do get a very strong sense of both my parents being here. Which again is like really wonderful. And I never get upset about the fact that physically they're no longer with me. That doesn't upset me at all. But when I remember the life force that was them and the way in which both of them had such an incredible influence on the world. I mean, I'm sure that poor vet went home thinking he'd just had an encounter with a madman. Oh gosh, that's funny. my father was very obstreperous, you know. And he would look a man straight in the eye and tell him exactly what he thought of him. He wouldn't. There was no holds barred, like. And my mother was very, very ladylike. And she would say, "Oh, Phelim, be quiet, don't be talking like that." But, you know, okay, so he would occasionally stop when Mum told him. But, like, he was very definitive about what he believed in and what was important to him. And that's something that we could all learn from. Because there's a lot of people today who, I suppose in many ways, kind of faff about. They don't really have strong views or integrity about what they should do in a situation. And in a situation like that, where, you know, I suppose you have to come from that basic tenet that the life of that hen is just as important to struggle for as any other life. Now, having said that, Mum and Dad were both meat eaters. Well, actually, Mum became kind of vegetarian. I say kind of. She was more or less vegetarian for about the last 10 years of her life or so. And when given the choice, she would take a vegetarian option. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to complicate this with issues about, you know, being a vegetarian or a vegan. Oh, and saying that, I did actually read a comment which annoyed me, and I don't really want comments like that underneath my videos. And the comment was in relation to using the sheep wool, and I was accused of being cruel, you know, that it was cruel to keep sheep and use the wool. Well, can I just say that although I use the word vegan, I use it quite loosely, because I try to eat a plant-based diet. But in strict terms, I'm not a vegan, because there are so many issues that still have to be resolved on that. And I am a person on a journey. I'm on the sacred journey of life. And I'm not going to be held accountable by people who have, you know, very strong commitments, which I applaud, but very strong commitments to being vegan. I'm not actually on that path. I try to eat a plant-based diet. I try to do the best I can. And I try not to judge others. Certainly when it comes to, you know, how they eat or what they believe in or whatever. Okay? So I'm just putting that out there. And I don't appreciate people who introduce arguments like that onto this YouTube channel. I think that's for other channels, you know. If you want to talk about the strict ethics of being a vegan, then there are lots of channels where you can do that. This channel isn't a vegan channel, okay? It's about someone living a life as best you can and trying to do the best for everything within the environment. I don't always get it right. And it's a journey. It's not a destination, it's a journey. So on that note, I shall go indoors now and have a lovely day, everybody.